Hello, my friends. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. This is a place where I talk about books, and it's New Year's Day when I'm recording this, so Happy New Year, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk about stats. This is something I always love to do for my own purposes, just look back on stats for my reading over the past year. And Storygraph makes that really easy and fun. I don't have to make my own pie charts. So I'm going to share some of these stats with you, as well as a few of my top books of the year. Let's start with the big numbers. I read 353 books in 2025, and that is compared to 378 in 2024. There's a noticeable drop, and I know exactly why that happened. At the end of July, I fell and sustained a concussion. Many of you have already heard this sad story. It did take me a long time to heal, and during that time, I read less and relied a lot more on audiobooks because the brain injury affected my vision. And it's interesting how this graph shows a big dip in print and a concurrent rise in audio over the month of August. And another thing that I noticed was that my reading preference favored nonfiction over fiction. And that was related to my inability to visualize, because that lack made reading fiction less pleasurable. Now, Storygraph doesn't always show every edition. And so sometimes I was listening to an audiobook, but I couldn't reflect that in Storygraph because there was only one edition that was a print edition. So I just marked that I was reading that. I know that I actually did listen to more audio than it shows in Storygraph, but you get the idea. Now, normally my fiction-nonfiction ratio is somewhere between 70% fiction and 30% nonfiction. And some years 60% fiction, 40% nonfiction. So this year it did fall within that same range, 62% fiction, 38% nonfiction. Two of my top nonfiction reads are On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, and I actually read the graphic novel edition with the art by Nora Krug. Fantastic. Oh, really, really liked that. And also, One Day Everyone Will Always Have Been Against This by Omar Akkad. Now, included in these numbers are 34 picture books. This is something that over the years I've gone back and forth about. Do I count picture books as books read or keep them in, a separate category or what? In the last few years, I just figure a book is a book and I put them all together. But for those of you who want to know numbers without picture books, that would be 319 books that I read, including audiobooks, in 2025. Now, what about format? Here's a lovely graph that shows 55% of the books that I read were in print, 34% in audio, and 10% were ebooks. Now, as I said, this doesn't exactly reflect because there weren't necessarily the choices available for editions in Storygraph, but close enough. Moods. Now, I find this very interesting. This is something I never would have tried to do before Storygraph, but consistently, my two top moods are reflective and emotional. and pretty close up there is also informative. But, that makes sense since I read a lot of nonfiction. Further down in moods, there's adventurous, and there are 48 books in that category. And I was curious, what books does Storygraph consider adventurous? So an example is the book Helm by Sarah Hall, which was the last book that I finished in 2025. Loved it so much. Now, I don't know that I would consider it adventurous. The style is innovative, gorgeous use of language. It's about a wind in northern England, a wind called Helm, and the narrative, a number of different viewpoints across history from Neolithic times all the way up to the present, and it kind of switches back and forth. It's definitely a literary novel. That's a separate category in Storygraph. We're going to get to that in a minute. But if you liked Daniel Mason's book, North Woods, definitely give Helm a go. Yeah. Oof. Wonderful. I gave 90 books that I read in 2025 5 stars. And I just won't talk about all of those books on this video, or I don't think any video, but I'm going to scroll through these 5-star reads on Storygraph and circle titles as examples. So I have some other outstanding examples of innovative structure, style, and or language, and those include A Horse at Night on Writing by Amina Cain, Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon, Salvage, Readings from the Wreck by Dionne Brand, Theory and Practice by Michelle de Kretser, Audition by Katie Kitamura, The Book of Records by Madeleine Thien, and Endling by Maria Reva. There's 1 or 2 more categories in moods that I want to talk about because funny and dark are tied at 38 books each. And in Storygraph, I checked, and none of those books that I read are actually both funny and dark, but to me, that's a perfect book, funny and dark. And that is why I love the writing of Miriam Toews. If you have suggestions of other books that are funny and dark or other authors, please let me know in the comments. Pace is one of the graphs that Storygraph creates for me. And apparently 59% of the books that I read have a medium pace, 26% have a fast pace, and I click through to have an example. What's a fast pace? Heartburn by Nora falls into that category. And then 14% have a slow pace. Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood falls into that category. The word devotional, I think you can tell it's going to be a slower paced book. But as somebody who used to do reader's advisory training for library staff, we never used the word slow. There's negative connotations with that. We would say leisurely or an unhurried pace. I don't know, just sounds better, doesn't it? Okay, what about the length of the book? There's a page number graph that shows 81% of the books that I read are under 300 pages. 17% are between 300 and 499 pages, and 2% are over 500 pages. There's just 4 books that are over 500 pages, so I had to have a look. Here they are. The Field by Dave Lapp, 540 pages. The Case of Cem by Vera Mutafchieva, translated from Bulgarian by Angela Rodel, 566. Collected Works by Lydia Sandgren, translated from Swedish by Agnes Broomé at 608. And Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright, and that is 662 pages. Well, some of these long books actually were audiobooks. Audiobook length, 49%, were 8 to 15 hours long, 46% under 8 hours, and 5%, so 6 books, were over 16 hours. Which were the longest books? Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor, 16 hours and 12 minutes. The Antidote by Karen Russell, 16 hours and 57 minutes. Catabasis by RF Kuang, 18 hours and 34 minutes. Same Bed, Different Dreams by Ed Park, 18 hours and 37 minutes. The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny by Kiran Desai, 25 hours and 31 minutes. And Book of Lives, a memoir of sorts by Margaret Atwood, 25 hours and 35 minutes. I am going to do a separate video of the best Canadian books that I read in 2025. I add separate tags in Storygraph for categories that I'm particularly interested in, and one of those categories is Canadian. So that's how I know that I read 115 Canadian books last year. According to Storygraph, the genre that I spent the most time with is literary fiction, 72 books. And when I scroll through my 5-star reads, I see that the most memorable of these literary books are often buddy reads. Pat over at Book Chat with Pat recently did her best books of 2025, and I noticed that it was the same with her. Her best books were often buddy reads or group reads or book club books. So these are just a handful of the best. Alexis writes, Praiseworthy. I led a group read of this. Had a wonderful time, absolutely wonderful time. Thank you to all of you who participated in that. The Case of Cem by Vera Mutafchieva, translated from Bulgarian by Angela Rodel. And I read this with Roz of Scallydandling About the Books and Sarah. We Do Not Part by Han Kang, translated by Paige Anya Morris and E. Ye Wang. I buddy read this with Louise. The Door by Magda Sabo, translated from Hungarian by Len Rix. I buddy read this with Natalie of Curious Reader. The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating by Elizabeth Tova Bailey. And I read this with my feminist book club, Jessica and Laura. The Most by Jessica Anthony. I buddy read with Louise. And my very top joint read was Hope Never Knew Horizon by Douglas Bruton, that I did a pseudo buddy read with Sean of Sean Breathes Books. The second largest category of books, according to Storygraph, is LGBTQIA+. And there are 55 books in that category, according to Storygraph. But I noticed that often a book has a lot of queer content or the author's queer, and that's not reflected in the Storygraph tags. So I add my own. And 32 books that aren't labeled that way in Storygraph, I added tags to. So it's actually quite a large category of my reading Total queer content, 87 books. And some of the standouts include These Heathens by Mia Mackenzie, Stag Dance by Tori Peters, The Details by Ia Genberg, that was translated from Swedish by Kira Josefsson, Boulder by Eva Baltasar, translated from Catalan by Julia Sanchez, and The Garden Against Time, In Search of a Common Paradise by Olivia Lang. Memoir was also a huge category for me. There's 51 books in that category, and just some of my 5-star reads include Raising Hair by Chloe Dalton, Careless People by Sarah Wynne Williams, All Our Ordinary Stories by Teresa Wong, A Truce That Is Not Peace by Miriam Taves, Book of Lives by Margaret Atwood. Now this one, I noticed, was not in my 5-star list on the year wrap-up, and I double-checked and discovered that I had marked this book at 4.75 after I finished reading it. And since then, I have been thinking about it so much, talking about it so much, I've decided to up my rating to 5 stars. And, okay, what else? Whale Eyes by James Robinson, Wake Up Pixoto by Wang Pixon, which is in graphic novel format, and This Way Up by Catherine Bradbury. And there are so many others. But my very top book of the year of all of the books that I've read is actually in the memoir category, and that is Mother Mary Come to Me by Arundhati Roy. Yeah, the best. I read 45 graphic novels, and some of the standouts include Petar and Liza by Miroslav Sekulic-Struya, which is translated by Anna Setka and Jenna Allen. Run Away With Me by Brian Selznick. All Princesses Die Before Dawn by Quentin Zutillon, translated from French by M.B. Valente. Gazians by Mike Curato. Angelica and the Bear Prince by Trung Le Nguyen. My Favorite Thing is Monsters. This is book 2 by Emil Ferris. These last 5 that I've just told you about are all queer books as well. And then Tokyo These Days by Taiyo Matsumoto. I read all 3 in the series. Book 3 is the final one. It was translated from Japanese by Michael Arias. And it wasn't until I completed the series that I realized this whole series is fantastic. And with manga, as this is, that's not surprising because each volume of manga is more like a chapter in a longer book. So it makes sense that it's not till you get to the end that you can evaluate or realize that, oh man, I love that. The whole thing, the whole series. As you've noticed already from the books I have pulled out as examples, I do read a lot in translation. I read 48 in translation in 2025. I also read quite a few children's books. So counting the picture books, I read 41. And a couple of my 5-star middle grade books are, my presentation today is about The Anaconda by Bibi Dumontak, translated from Dutch, and The 9 Moons of Hanyu and Lu Li by Karen Jan Glasser. This last one was historical, and 32 of the books I read last year fall under that category. I also add my own tag if it's by an Indigenous author or illustrator, and 31 books have that tag. If I combine Storygraph's categories of fantasy, 23 books, science fiction, 21 books, and horror, 8 books, into one, and just call them all speculative fiction, here are some of the standouts. The Mimicking of Known Successes by Malka Older, Memory Piece by Lisa Ko, The Blue Book of Nebo by Manon Stephan Ross, The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, and Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. And I'm going to end this book by talking about the worst. So my biggest disappointment was Catabasis by RF Kuang. I just found it predictable and boring. I kept listening to it and actually got more out of it because I had seen this fantastic event at the Stratford Theatre Festival. It was a dynamic reading of Dante's Inferno, described as a fusion of text, music, and thought, presented by Dopolavoro Teatrale. So there was this spoken word artist, Daniele Bartolini, who recited sections of Dante's Inferno in the medieval Italian, in the original. And we learned that this type of recitation is actually something that's quite common in Italy. People know whole sections by heart. But there was also Dr. Donato Santeramo, who explained what this next section of Dante's Inferno covered. And there was also a simultaneous English translation on a screen above. So it was kind of like being at the opera where you can see the English translation. And in addition, there was a musician with original music composition happening at the same time. So increasing the mood with his a synthesizer, and I can't remember, he did have some instruments as well. So as I was listening to the novel Catabasis, I could, pick out certain parts of Dante's Inferno, even though I've never read the whole thing. But it's one of those classics that we encounter so often in other works of literature that I already had a certain amount of familiarity with the content. Catabasis means a journey into the underworld, and I think there's a lot of people last year that learned about the meaning of this word and pronunciation of Catabasis because of this fantasy novel. And because I have enjoyed her books in the past, I thought that I was really going to enjoy this. And it wasn't until I was halfway through, and it's a long book, that I really got interested. So I still gave it 4 stars. So it's not like I thought it was terrible or anything like that, but I just thought I would enjoy it more. And it's entirely possible that it was because of recovery from concussion that I found it less enjoyable. I know that because that was the time period when I was reading it. Just as an aside, within a short period of time, I also read Is a River Alive by Robert Macfarlane, and he uses the word catabasis in that book. He's talking about going on a canoe river trip downriver, and katabasis is used in that sense because it also can mean a downward journey. And then in the book Helm by Sarah Hall, the wind is considered a katabatic wind because it's the kind of wind that goes downhill with a dense cold air. So that word kept popping up in my reading in 2025. How about that? I'm going to finish off with the worst book that I read to the end. Most books, if I don't like them, I just don't finish them. This one I read all the way to the end. The Magician of Tiger Castle by Louis Sachar. I gave it 3 stars. The only reason I kept reading was because it was for my YA book club. My average rating last year was 4.45 stars. So I know how to pick them. I just read the good ones, generally. And in the YA book club, we all felt that even though this book has been marketed as Louis Sachar's first novel for adults, it's like the author really struggles in figuring out, is this a kid's book? Is it a YA book? Is it an adult book? It's kind of a weird blend. But that's not the reason I rated it so low. It's because the magician in the novel he makes a potion that curses this bad guy with having a voice like that of a little girl, and that is so terrible that it starts a war, and the misogyny of that really upset me. You couldn't convince me to rate that book any more highly simply because of that one aspect of the book. Anyway, that is all I've got for you today with my stats for 2025. So thank you so very much for watching. Do you like doing stats? Let me know if you do this for your own reading. I'm curious about that. And say hello in the comments. I always love hearing from you. Tell me whatever you want to tell me. And I will see you all soon in the next one when I talk about the best Canadian books that I read in 2025. And in the meantime, Happy New Year and happy reading, everybody. Bye for now.